America could double its oil production, drop the price of oil to $30 a barrel, and the Putin regime would collapse in 6 months.
Is it that straightforward?
Well, you don't restrict Russian oil. You encourage. You say, like, export more oil. We want more of your oil. Persuade the Saudis, because part of the reason why the oil is close to $80 a barrel is because last year Saudi Arabia and OPEC, who are the major swing producers, as they're called, of petroleum of oil, reduced their production capacity in order to push up prices, because that's what OPEC and the major oil production companies do. They vary their production in order to have an influence on oil prices. And your question is it that simple? Well, it's actually already been done, and it worked. In the 1980s, in a nutshell, from 1983 onwards, Saudi Arabia, under strong political pressure from the United States, and in protest at the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan, started massively opening the taps and dropped the price of oil by the mid-1980s to around $12 a barrel, 12. And from 1986 onwards, the Soviet Union was just completely unable to pay its bills and actually had to seek out its first sovereign loan from Deutsche Bank. And actually, the Soviet Union couldn't work because the centralized production, the centralized communist economy, was not producing. It was entirely reliant on high oil prices after the first oil shock in 1973. So for that decade, 1973 and to the mid-1980s, Brezhnev's Russia and the Soviet Union just lived on oil revenue, just as Putin's does today. So if you drop the oil price by 50%, it went down to $40, $30 a barrel, the Russian economy doesn't balance. It just runs out of money extremely quickly.
So why doesn't America do as you suggest? Why doesn't America ramp up its own oil production and try and drive down the global price of oil to hurt Russia?
Well, it kind of already is, actually. Already, actually, this week today, America became the biggest exporter of liquefied natural gas in the world. There has been quite a lot of resistance to opening up new oil fields, particularly like the Alaska XL pipeline. You may have heard about that. That was basically sort of put on hold for environmental reasons. Trump was trying to push it through. Then it got suspended. I mean, in theory, hydraulic fracturing is the fracking, which has over the last 15 years created this gigantic explosion of oil and gas production in the United States, and has transformed the US from a net importer of oil to a massive exporter of oil and gas. Fracking partly depends on high oil prices. That's kind of the problem, because the cost of extraction of a barrel of oil varies enormously depending on where it is and the geology and all kinds of technical things. But the bottom line is that the Saudis can extract their oil at around $7 a barrel. That's the production cost. Whereas if you have to use hydraulic fracturing, as the Americans and the Canadians do, it's more the break-even point is much higher. And then, of course, you have to add tax to that. So fracked oil is has a cost of up to $40 a barrel, plus tax. So the irony is, to answer your question, why doesn't the United States just ramp up its production and drop the prices? It's because if you drop the prices, its entire oil industry goes out of business. Unfortunately, it's kind of such sort of,
because it'd be losing money because its production costs would be higher than the cost of the oil.
Yeah, so it's sort of a maddening sort of swings and roundabout situation, and unfortunately, Russia. The Russian state has been spectacularly stupid in launching the war at all. It was unbelievably badly informed about the political and military conditions in Ukraine. There's all kinds of massive screw-ups and idiocies inherent in the way the Kremlin has approached this war. But the one thing that the Kremlin is actually super smart about is that they have this amazing economic team that actually have managed to, brilliantly steer public finances and manage the sovereign wealth funds, and very, very quickly adapt the Russian economy to getting around sanctions and absorbing costs of the war and so on. There's actually very good economists working with the Kremlin and the Russian central bank, and they've done the deep thinking about this. And the result of it is that they actually have put the Russian economy in a far more even keel, despite fighting a massive war, than any economy in the West, certainly the British economy, sadly.
And just finally, Owen, is the Russian growth rate sustainable? They've obviously moved the economy onto a war footing, but what is the impact on living standards of ordinary Russians? Could that have a political pressure on Putin? And is the growth rate sustainable?
Well, that's an excellent question, because actually, what you have is what economists call military Keynesianism. Keynesianism is like, if the government spends lots of money, then the economy grows. It's what Theodore says. It's what President Roosevelt did in the 1930s, just like poured tons of money into like building dams and roads, and you employ tons of people. You prime the pump, and this idea that if the state pours tons of money into the economy grows. So yes, you're right to ask that question, like how much of this is just like fake growth caused by this by massive military spending. Well, largely it is fake growth, and it's not sustainable growth. It's just government spending of oil money on the war effort. And on a more fundamental level, the war has completely screwed Russia in terms of of development. Russia's been cut off from international capital markets. They've expropriated and screwed over all foreign investors. You'd have to be completely insane to invest money in Russia. Foreign specialists will not work there, and you kind of need those kind of people if you're going to want to develop, save your aging oil and gas industry. There's all kinds of the entire Russian banking system has been basically isolated from the West. You have 1 million people, overwhelmingly young, educated professionals who have fled the country because of the war. There's like a whole raft of like totally disastrous, awful things that have happened to the Russian economy as a result of this war. And in the long term, of course, those chickens are all going to come home to roost. But right now, and that's what we're concerned about, since we're talking about the Ukrainian war, right now, unfortunately, the oil exports are allowing Putin to essentially take the expenses of this war in his stride and continue to bombard mercilessly Ukrainian towns, mostly from warplanes launched inside Russia, by the way. They're not even using Ukrainian airspace. And the political losses, the political system seems to be remarkably enough sustainable. People don't really appreciate the war has an economic cost. And I very often see people who, in fact, just a couple of days ago, who come back and forth from Russia. It just seems to be absolutely fine. The war is invisible. Everyone just gets on with their lives, and everyone is in this sort of state of denial. There are three things that need to go wrong for the Putin regime to fall, and the same three things that went wrong in Russia in 1917, same three things that went wrong in Russia in 1991, last two regime collapses in recent Russian history. And that is, you have to have a economic crisis, a palpable, deep economic crisis. You have to have a government, a state that's completely discredited itself and proved itself incapable of governing. And you need to have like a clear alternative successor to power. And none of those three things pertain in Putin's Russia today.
Thank you for watching Frontline for Times Radio. For more on global security and the war in Ukraine, you can listen to Times Radio, take out a digital subscription to the Times, and click subscribe on our YouTube channel.